So I asked you all over on my community tab if you'd like to see a big comparison video between these two palettes, the I Need a Nude from Natasha Denona and the limited edition, which apparently it's not limited edition because they brought it back, Ethereal Eyes Palette from Makeup by Mario. I am just a touch obsessed with wet looking eyeshadows, and these are two more cool toned eyeshadow palettes that have a lot of wet sparkles in them. These are incredibly similar palettes in a lot of ways, and in some ways they are quite different. Really excited to bring you guys this video today. And if you're new to my channel, hi, my name's Amanda. I really love these kind of everyday, beautiful, wet looking eyeshadow looks. I also absolutely love doing comparison and deep dive videos on my channel. So if you appreciate that kind of content, please make sure to subscribe. I would absolutely love to have you back. I'm just gonna kind of dive right into things. I think that what makes this kind of comparison so interesting to me is that on paper, these are just so incredibly similar. They're about the same price, around $69. They're about the same ounces, about 0.6 ounces of product in each. So that really just leaves us with the formulas and the colors to dive into. I do have a preference for one of these palettes that I will tell you, but I'm really going to focus on in this video describing both the formulas so that ultimately you find the right formula for you, because I am not you, and I think it's really important to me that you find the best product that is going to actually work for you rather than the one that I just particularly like more. That's how I like to do things on my channel. If we're talking strictly about a palette that just has a lot of options, Natasha Denona already does have a leg up on the Makeup by Mario because we have 15 different eyeshadows to choose from. It's just a larger palette, but the Makeup by Mario has 12. I would say that sometimes you like more diversity. Sometimes you want something a little bit more curated so that you're not worried about having too many options when you go to put your makeup on. So again, what could be a bad thing to some people could actually be a good thing to others. I really enjoy that this is a big palette with a big mirror, but the Makeup by Mario would work way better for travel, being that it is smaller. Before we get into talking about the glitters within this palette, I want to just say in general, the color stories are incredibly similar, and I actually have on my eyes today one palette on each eye. I mean, in reality, you guys, it is very difficult to tell the difference between the two. I can because I'm now familiar with both palettes, but the everyday person walking around the street is not going to be able to necessarily tell the difference once these are on the eyes when using colors and textures that are very similar. Now, that being said, though the color story of these two palettes is very similar, I would argue that the formulas themselves are quite different. The one thing that I will say as a general rule, and a big takeaway that I want you guys to get from this video is that if you enjoy an eyeshadow with more grip, an eyeshadow that is going to stick where you place it, sometimes it might take some time to build up, but in general just has more grip to it. Immediately, I would say the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette is probably better for you. Across all of the formulas, they adhere to the eyes much easier in my experience, and they last a little bit longer. That being said, the Makeup by Mario formula is just a bit wispier. It has a little bit more of a powdery texture, whether we're talking about the glitters or the mattes. So whichever you prefer, the good news is there is a palette for you, but there is a difference here. The mattes within the Natasha Denona formula, I have personally found last really well on my eyes, and I'm able to get more precision out of them because of the grippy texture. Now, that being said, I'm sure a lot of you all are familiar with the Natasha Denona formula. I like that it's a good mix of being blendable, but also having that grip. But within the matte formula, something that I think was kind of a missed opportunity is that Stone, Tender, and Mesh are all so similar within the Natasha Denona palette, and they very easily could have made one of these shades of black. As far as the color story goes within the mattes, I wish there was more diversity. And we're getting back to this point about the selection of colors within both palettes. Even though the Natasha Denona has overall more shadows, there isn't as much diversity within the matte color story. So I do think that that is ultimately something, a criticism that I have of this palette. But the formula overall, I think lasts really well on the eyes and wears really well. And ultimately, for me, I really enjoy longevity, especially with the kind of current look that I'm going for. I'm usually doing like a winged liner just with powder, and I really want that wing to last. I can really depend on this palette to have a long-lasting pigment on the eyes. That being said, as far as the Makeup by Mario palette goes, this palette ultimately really reminds me of K-Beauty eyeshadows with just a touch more pigment. They're quite powdery. There's a lot of kickback within each pan. Some people don't enjoy that. Some people don't mind. It really is ultimately up to you all. I have been critical in the past of the powderiness of these shadows because I have more dry skin, and sometimes it can actually make my eyes look a little bit drier. But that being said, right now it is the fall. I have revisited this palette, gotten my hands back into it, and overall, it's not looking as poorly as I have remembered in the past. That's something that I'm really excited, honestly, to share with you guys, that I am now having a better experience with the mattes than I have in the past. But that being said, this is not a palette I would reach for if I'm dealing with textural issues on my eyes. If I have more textured skin around the eyes. I mean, right now it's fall, my skin's doing okay. There's not much dryness going on around my eyes, but we're going into winter and I'm just not positive. I don't have a really good confidence in the palette to necessarily perform well when my skin gets drier. I really enjoy how blendable these shadows are within each other, but it's a little bit more difficult because they don't have as much grip necessarily. It's a little bit more difficult to get precision out of these shadows. You just have to kind of take your time more. And for me, I honestly don't want to spend a half an hour on my eye makeup. Some days I do when I want to like play and, really experiment, but on like an everyday basis, if I want a precise look that still takes like 10 minutes, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to do that with a shadow formula like this. But I think if you're just like a put something in the crease, put some glitter on the eyes kind of person, a formula like this is going to work for you, I think. And a formula like the one from Natasha Denona is also going to work for you. There are just obvious nuances to these formulas. Now, I want to talk about the metallics as well as the wet glitters. Within the Makeup by Mario palette, you only really get 2 metallic shadows. They definitely have the most grip out of any of the shadows that are within the palette. That being said, they're also 2 shadows that I don't tend to reach for. They kind of fall a little bit flat for me. I think really the magic of the Ethereal Eyes palette lies within the glittery toppers. And here's the thing about the glittery toppers is that they are very wet looking, but they are literal pressed glitters. So if you're looking for a wet looking glitter with some grip to it, you're not going to find it with this palette. But it is an absolutely beautiful wet, very soft in the finger, lightweight glitter, and it does stick to the eye. By the way, this is the Makeup by Mario palette right here, and then this is the Natasha Denona. You get a lot of wet effect very quickly with the glitters within this palette, but something I've been critical about with this palette before in the past is that there's not really much diversity here as far as the glitters go. Like, they look much different in the pan. Like, once you swatch them out, they kind of all look the same. On the eyes, they kind of all look the same. I just feel like there was an opportunity there to really switch up, maybe add a little bit more base pigment to one so that you can actually see the difference within the undertones of the glitters. It's just very difficult to get a lot of different glitter looks within the Makeup by Mario palette. You're really relying on those mattes to give you different looks. That is a different case with the Natasha Denona palette. First of all, the metallics in here are absolutely stunning. They're an incredibly smooth formula, and if you're someone that really loves these taupey brown shades, you got a lot of good one and dones in here. I'm a lover of a taupey brown, and this palette really calls to me for that reason. I can use Filigree or Ella or Delilah all on their own, all over the eyes as a one and done shadow, and it feels complete. It feels really beautiful. So reaching for a palette for a one and done look, you can get that with these metallics. With the Makeup by Mario, you can. It's just, it feels like it's missing something to me, kind of that wow factor. I will say that Whisper, like, I am never a fan of just like a champagne metallic without wet glitter. For me, it's like if I'm going champagne, I'm going wet, sparkly kapow rather than something a little bit softer. But here's the thing with the Natasha Denona glitter formulas. They are so beautiful. They have a little bit more base pigment to them. They have a little bit more grip to them. And we have different textures to work with. So Sheen and Mia are quite similar. One's a little bit more pinky, one is just a touch more warm toned, but they actually look different on the eyes. Like, you can tell the difference. They're a very thin formula, but the glitters are a little bit more fine. I think sometimes the Makeup by Mario palette can look more wet if you're going for these thinner glitters, because the glitters are just bigger. Sometimes it's nice to have some smaller glitters and then a couple of larger glitter particles. And by the way, it's not large glitter. I'm just saying in comparison to the others. But if you really want that kind of twinkle effect, you can get that with one swipe of the glitters from the Makeup by Mario. That being said, you have more control with the Natasha Denona, and you can see in the demo, I used Sheen, a little bit of Mia, and then I can go on top with this shade Muse, which is a true kind of pressed glitter with a bit of a thicker kind of formula, which is great. It actually adheres to the eyes really easily and lasts, but you can kind of just take a little bit of it and add it right where you want it. So you just have more control. You can go for a soft wet effect, or you can go for like a kapow wet effect within the I Need a Nude palette. Something else that I've been kind of thinking about within these two palettes is that I think if you do have a darker skin tone, I see the Makeup by Mario palette working a little bit better for you, because a lot of these mattes just have a little bit more pigment. I definitely think that the Natasha Denona palette is beautiful. You don't need both of these. I think as an overall palette, I lean towards the Natasha Denona palette because I just have more variety here as far as the textures go. I like that I have these one and dones. I like that I can control the amount of like the wet effect that I get. And I like that I can depend on it to last on the eyes. But I think if you just kind of want like a washed, undone eye with a bit of wet glitter, you see yourself using the Ethereal Eyes Palette, you like the color story, you like that there's more of a selection of mattes, and you prefer more of a powdery formula, you're not as worried about the grip of the wet looking eyeshadows. Honestly, the looks that I'm getting out of the Ethereal Eyes palette are really pretty. So if you're thinking about either of these palettes, if this video was really helpful for you all, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up so that other people can find it. I will leave both palettes down below for you all. I really, really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in my next one.